Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, July 8th, 2022. President Biden issues an executive order on abortion access for women in states that have restricted abortion after the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, with specific steps on access to medication abortion, helping women cross state lines if necessary to obtain abortion services, and protecting patient privacy. Anti-abortion activists gathering at the Heritage Foundation in Washington to discuss strategy from their perspective, now that the abortion issue is back to the states. Jobs report for June, Labor Department says the U.S. added 372,000 jobs. Unemployment rate stays at 3.6%. World leaders reacting to the assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was shot and killed on a street corner while giving a campaign speech in support of a candidate for an election this weekend. The suspect apparently did not flee and was taken into custody. President Biden saying he is stunned, outraged, and deeply saddened. 4 U.S. Border Patrol agents facing disciplinary action after the incident last year in Del Rio, Texas, in which agents on horseback rounded up Haitian migrants seeking to cross into the U.S., and some accused of whipping the migrants. Report from Customs and Border Protection's Office of Professional Responsibility finding failures at multiple levels of the agency, a lack of appropriate policies and training, and unprofessional and dangerous behavior by several individual agents. From CNN, President Joe Biden on Friday signed an executive order aimed at protecting access to reproductive health services in the wake of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade and eliminating the constitutional right to an abortion. The executive order attempts to safeguard access to medication abortion and emergency contraception, protect patient privacy, launch public education efforts, as well as bolster the security of and the legal options available to those seeking and providing abortion services. Some reporting from CNN. Before outlining what is in that executive order, President Biden citing an example of how he says women are being harmed now by actions by some states.
And in a number of these states, the laws are so extreme, they've raised the threat of criminal penalties for doctors and healthcare providers. They're so extreme that many don't allow for exceptions, even for rape or incest. Let me say that again. Some of the states don't allow for exceptions for rape or incest. This isn't some imagined horror. It's already happening. Just last week, it was reported that a 10-year-old girl was a rape victim in Ohio, 10 years old. And she was forced to have to travel out of the state to Indiana to seek to terminate the presidency and maybe save her life. That's last part is my judgment. 10 years old. 10 years old. Raped, 6 weeks pregnant, already traumatized, was forced to travel to another state. Imagine being that little girl. I'm serious. Just imagine being that little girl, 10 years old.
President Biden at the White House, standing beside him, Vice President Kamala Harris, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra, and the Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco. President Biden listing what is in the executive order that he signed.
I'm signing this important executive order. I'm asking the Justice Department that, much like they did in the civil rights era, to do something, do everything in their power to protect these women seeking to invoke their rights. In states where clinics are still open, to protect them from intimidation, to protect the right of women to travel from a state that prohibits seeking the medical attention that she needs to a state to provide that care, to protect the woman's right to FDA-approved, the Federal Drug Administration-approved medication that's been available for over 20 years. The executive order provides safeguards to access care. A patient comes into an emergency room in any state in the union. She's expressing and experiencing life-threatening miscarriage. But the doctor is going to be so concerned about being criminalized for treating her, they delay treatment to call the hospital lawyer who's concerned the hospital will be penalized if the doctor provides the life-saving care. It's outrageous. I don't care what your position is. It's outrageous. And it's dangerous. That's why this executive order directs the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, to ensure all patients, including pregnant women and girls, experiencing pregnancy loss get emergency care they need under federal law, and the doctors have clear guidance on their own responsibilities and protections, no matter what state they're in. The executive order protects access to contraceptions that I'm about to sign. Justice Thomas himself said that under the reasoning of this decision, this is what Justice Thomas said in his concurring opinion, that the court should reconsider the constitutional right to contraception, to use contraception, even among married couples. And what century are they in? There used to be a case called Connecticut versus Griswold, which was declared unconstitutional in the late 60s. It said a married couple in the privacy of their bedroom could not decide to use contraception. Right now, in all 50 states in the District of Columbia, the Affordable Care Act guarantees insurance coverage for women's health services, including free birth control. The executive order directs HHS to identify ways to expand access to reproductive health services, like IUDs, birth control pills, emergency contraception. And equally important, this executive order protects patient privacy and access to information, which, looking at the press assembled before me, probably know more about it than I do. I'm not a tech guy, I'm learning. But right now, when you use a search engine or the app on your phone, companies collect your data. They sell it to other companies, or they even share it with law enforcement. There's an increasing concern that extremist governors and others will try to get that data off of your phone, which is out there in the ether, to find what you're seeking, where you're going, and what you're doing with regard to your health care. Talk about no privacy. No privacy in the Constitution. There's no privacy, period. This executive order asks the FTC to crack down on data brokers that sell private information to extreme groups, or in my view, sell private information to anybody. It provides private health information. It protects private health information in states with extreme laws. And the executive order strengthens coordination at a federal level. It establishes a task force led by the White House Department and the Department of Human Services, focused specifically on using every federal tool available to protect access to reproductive health care.
President Biden at the White House before signing this executive order. He also, in his remarks, reiterated, as he has since the Supreme Court decision came out overturning Roe v. Wade, calling on Congress to pass a national law that codifies abortion rights and for the American people to vote for pro-choice candidates. The president acknowledging he alone cannot restore the right to an abortion nationwide. Associated Press article about this executive order includes that it comes as the president, quote, faced mounting pressure from fellow Democrats to be more forceful on the subject after the Supreme Court ended the constitutional right to the procedure 2 weeks ago. Jennifer Klein is the co-chair of the White House Gender Policy Council. She was at the daily White House briefing and took reporters' questions that touched on the frustration.
The administrator said that Biden administration was considering having Medicaid paid for travel for people. And with some of the instances the president just highlighted in his speech just now, that seems like something that would be very useful right away. Why isn't that included in this tranche of action? And then secondly, if you could just broadly speak, there's been some frustration with abortion rights supporters that this administration is not moving fast enough. Some of this stuff seems like it could have been done on day one, considering you knew the leak when what was coming.
So on your first question on Medicaid, as you heard from the president the day of the decision, and again today as part of this executive order, we are very focused on protecting that right to travel. The Attorney General issued an extremely strong statement again on the day of the decision, and has continued to be vigilant so that no woman, no person who is seeking a medical service in a state where it is legal is prevented from doing that. We're also looking at all options to figure out how to best effectuate that right to travel. On your second question, more broadly, I sort of take issue with the premise of the question because I think, first of all, what the president did on day one, which was really significant, was to take immediate action, as I said, to ensure that medication abortion is available and accessible. 54% of abortions in this country are through medication abortion, excuse me. So that is a hugely significant thing to make sure that people have accurate information about medication abortion and have the right to take it. You know, a sort of falsity that is already out there is that it's illegal everywhere in the country. It's not. So we're, in this executive order, taking further action to make sure that the FDA has the support they need to go through their scientific process, and that people have the information they need to access and get this vital, critical medication, as well as contraception, which, you know, as we noted, the Supreme Court put on the table already. The other thing I would say is, you know, the leaked decision was 2 weeks ago. So in addition to the immediate actions that the administration took, Secretary of Health and Human Services Becerra took a series of actions while the president was away in Europe. When he came back, his first public event was meeting with 9 Democratic governors who really are in the front lines to talk to them about what we could do best to help them and what they are doing on their own to actually ensure reproductive rights and health in their states. And then the last thing I would say, and you know, you heard the president say it, is you can't solve by executive action what the Supreme Court has done. The Supreme Court has taken away a constitutional right that was precedent for nearly 50 years. And I think we all need to be mindful. He is very mindful. We are all very mindful that that can't be solved by executive action alone, and that the best and fastest way to fix that is by codifying Roe, restoring Roe by legislation. But that doesn't mean we won't be taking the actions he took today and more as we consider best actions.
Jennifer Klein is co-chair of the White House Gender Policy Council, getting reporters' questions at the start of today's regular White House briefing. While President Biden was signing the abortion access executive order at the White House, elsewhere in Washington at the Heritage Foundation, there was a panel of anti-abortion advocates discussing what's next after the Supreme Court's decision to overturn the Roe v. Wade constitutional right to abortion. An audience member asked the panel about the case of the 10-year-old rape victim, one of the cases that President Biden had brought up. You're going to hear the answers from Alexandra DeSanctis, National Review staff writer, and Catherine Glenn Foster, President and CEO of Americans United for Life.
Most recently, they had a case of a 10-year-old who was seeking an abortion in a different state, and I think that's probably the only thing your book didn't talk about. And that, and as pro-life as I am, and I know it's extremely rare statistically, but it still does happen, and that is the only area that I have difficulty explaining. I don't know that there's any way to make a 10-year-old comfortable having a baby under those circumstances. How do you talk someone through that? How do you defend that, particularly under the circumstance of having been violated already? I mean, obviously that child is never going to be okay, but what are your suggestions for that?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think you're referring to the story of a 10-year-old having been raped and seeking an abortion, right? So as you say, of course, very uncommon, but horrific. We don't touch on that specific example in the book, but we do talk about the rape exception, because I think this is where the pro-abortion case is quite strong. But ultimately, I think it fails because it doesn't solve that child's problem, or a woman who's been raped's problem, to then turn around and enact violence on her child. And it isn't the fault of her child that evil thing happened to her, right? And so as much as it might be nice to kind of wave a magic wand and get that person out of that situation, it actually wouldn't be compassionate to her either, or to her child, to then suggest that abortion is a solution, even though it kind of seems like a reverse button. It really isn't. It's just a second act of violence. So I think that's a very difficult issue to talk about as pro-lifers, but we shouldn't be afraid of it, especially if we're thinking about this from the framework of both the mother and the child and what's best for both of them.
Catherine, you look like you want to give a quick answer to that.
Maybe just briefly, yeah. So when it comes to rape, far too many American women have experienced this, first of all. It is a violence against women, but we need to get to the heart of that violence, and we need to eradicate that violence. Both rape and abortion stem from that same culture of violence and from the demeaning of women. So that is the core problem here that we need to be fixing. Abortion is not a solution to rape. It just heaps violence upon violence. And in fact, I was at Georgetown with a woman who was in fact raped and wrote her law review article on the state of the law, on parental rights of the rapist and how we need to be addressing those concerns. Now, some of the laws have changed in the years since, but that's a big part of it. Now, when we talk about the rape exception, then that actually diminishes the viewpoint and the desires of those women who are raped, but still recognize women who are raped, women who are sex trafficked. Many of them do want to keep their child. They recognize that that child is their child, that it's part of them too, and that the parentage, the paternal part of that isn't that child's future. But then their experience is demeaned and lessened when we just say, oh, how about a rape exception, And then in a side note, when we're talking about a 10-year-old, if there's, a threat to her life, then that's a separate issue that's taken care of. That's not, in the context of an abortion. But otherwise, I think the rape exception, the rape discussion kind of covers it.
Catherine Glenn Foster is the head of Americans United for Life. You also heard from Alexandra DeSantis, who writes for National Review, part of a panel on abortion policy co-hosted by the Conservative Women's Network and Heritage Foundation. Fox News reports that Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh slipped out the back door of a Washington, D.C. restaurant Wednesday night after pro-choice protesters received a tip of where he was dining, Politico reported. Demonstrators were told that the conservative justice who voted in favor of overturning women's right to an abortion under Roe v. Wade in June was eating at Morton's, the steakhouse restaurant in Washington's downtown area. Protesters then gathered in front of the restaurant while organizers of the event called the restaurant manager and demanded that Kavanaugh be made to leave. This came up at today's White House briefing with Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Fox News Channel reporter Peter Ducey with the question.
You talked a little bit about privacy today. Does the president think it's appropriate for abortion rights protesters to intimidate Supreme Court justices when they're out to eat, like Brett Kavanaugh, who had to sneak out of a steakhouse last night?
We have been pretty clear on this. The president has been very clear that we condemn any intimidation of judges in this specific question here. We have condemned that. We have signed. He has signed a piece of legislation making sure that they have the protection that they need.
But you never said don't go to their houses. So as long as they're peaceful, would you say don't go to a restaurant that a Supreme Court justice is at?
What I'm saying is we condemn any intimidation when it comes to judges. The president has talked about this, and we have put out statements in his name and many times.
If protesters know that a justice is out to eat at a restaurant, that they can go and protest as long as they are what you consider peaceful. That's okay.
Well, we have said that we want to see peaceful protests. That's what we have said. We want to see the protests be peaceful, but when it comes to intimidation, that is something that we have condemned.
So where's the line? If these protesters can go to a justice's house and they can go to a restaurant, where is it that you don't think it's appropriate for a group of protesters to go?
I just laid out, you asked me about intimidation. We condemn intimidation. We condemn any violence, and we've been very clear. It is a clear definition of what violence is or what intimidation is. Peaceful protest, people should be allowed to be able to do that.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre getting reporters' questions, in this case Peter Ducey from Fox News, in the White House briefing room. Thomas Griffith is a retired U.S. Federal Appeals Court judge, D.C. Circuit, and was also on President Biden's Supreme Court Reform Commission. He was interviewed today by Washington Post Libby Casey about the trust in the High Court, whether that trust is now waning, and also the Dobbs decision on abortion, and the fact that this volatile issue, abortion rights, which for almost 50 years was a settled constitutional right, has now been cast back into the political arena.
I understand that you won't comment on the merits of the case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, but as a citizen and as someone who knows the consequences of legal decisions, what was your initial reaction?
Well, no, I wasn't surprised, right? Because of the leak, the anticipation was that this is where the court was likely to be, and certainly this court and the justices on this court, knowing what we do about their approach to the Constitution, their view of the role of a judge, in that sense, was not a surprising decision. In fact, it may have been a predictable decision. What I worry about most is that we now have an issue that's being put back in the political sphere to debate. I worry about whether we're up to the type of debate that should accompany such a contentious issue. Many have observed this is a time of great polarization, of strong language that looks at opponents as enemies, that assumes bad faith on the part of those who disagree with one another. We're entering into a debate on as difficult an issue as I can think of. I worry whether we are equipped to have the type of debate that the issue deserves, and I worry instead that it will be a debate that will be less a debate and more just expressions of acrimony and outrage, and assuming bad faith by those who disagree with one another, and that's not healthy for the republic. But that's the state that we're in right now, so we better get ready for it. Hopefully, the people who are listening to this interview, hopefully all of us in our own sphere of influence, will listen carefully to others, listen empathetically to others, understand as best we can where they're coming from, and then engage responsibly without accusations of bad faith, and without the acrimony that too often characterizes our political discussion in the last several years.
Thomas Griffith, retired federal appeals court judge, also member of the President's Supreme Court Reform Commission, at a Washington Post Live program today. NPR reports at least 9 states have banned abortion so far, including Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Texas, West Virginia, and Wisconsin, and a dozen more states are expected to prohibit or restrict the procedure in the coming weeks. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Book TV, every Sunday on C-SPAN 2, features leading authors discussing their latest nonfiction books. At 8 p.m. Eastern, Francis Fukuyama, author of Liberalism and Its Discontents, discusses the current state of classical liberalism and critiques it from both the left and right. Then, at 10 p.m. Eastern, on Afterwards, former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos talks about her time serving in the Trump administration and her book Hostages No More, The Fight for Education Freedom and the Future of the American Child. She's interviewed by Jeb Bush, former governor of Florida. Watch Book TV every Sunday on C-SPAN 2 and find a full schedule on your program guide, or watch online anytime at booktv.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. CNBC writes the job growth accelerated at a much faster pace than expected in June, indicating that the main pillar of the U.S. economy remains strong despite pockets of weakness. Non-farm payrolls increased 372,000 in the month, better than the 250,000 Dow Jones estimate, and continuing what has been a strong year for job growth, according to the data Friday from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Unemployment rate was 3.6%, unchanged from May and in line with estimates. Back to the White House and reaction from President Biden.
Today, the Labor Department reported that we added 372,000 jobs last month. 372,000. Here's why it's important. Our private sector has now recovered all of the jobs lost during the pandemic and added jobs on top of that. We have more Americans working today in the private sector than any day under my predecessor, more today than any time in American history. Today. In the second quarter of this year, we created more jobs than any quarter under any of my predecessors in nearly 40 years before the pandemic. Think about that. At a time when our critics said the economy was too weak or having already added more jobs we had already added more jobs in my first year as president of any president in history, we still added more jobs in the past 3 months than any administration in nearly 40 years. Now look, I know times are tough. Prices are too high. Families are facing the cost of living crunch. But today's economic news confirms the fact that my economic plan is moving this country in a better direction. The unemployment rate is near a historic low of 3.6%. Private sector jobs are at a record high. Gas prices, still way too high, have fallen now 25 days in a row. And this week we saw the second largest single-day decrease in gas prices in a decade. We still have a lot of work to do. I'm not suggesting there's a lot more work to do, but I am suggesting we're making significant progress. The program is working.
President Biden at the White House. The Joint Economic Committee Republicans, their Twitter, at JEC Republicans, has this: we remain 6 million jobs below pre-pandemic trend. Growth in the labor force participation rate remains flat, and workers are continuing to see inflation gnaw away at their earnings. And then they tag Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, ranking member on the Joint Economic Committee. Wall Street today, the Dow down 46, NASDAQ up 13, S&P down 3. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, writes ABC News, said Friday it is moving to discipline personnel who confronted migrants on horseback last year during a surge of unauthorized border crossings into Del Rio, Texas. Border Patrol agents last September were seen in photos using their patrol horses to force migrants back down the banks of the Rio Grande, and one was accused of using the long reins attached to his saddle to whip migrants, whip in quotes. No agents were found to have struck any migrant, but some of those who arrived on the banks of the river following a request from the Texas State Police used unnecessary force and profanity-laden threats to push migrants back into the flowing river. They're reporting from ABC News. The Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, CBP, Chris Magnus, held a news conference today.
Despite initial appearances, after a careful review and analysis of videos, photos, and eyewitness accounts, this included an interview with a photographer on the scene and other members of the media, OPR found no evidence Border Patrol agents involved in this incident struck any person with their reins intentionally or otherwise. However, a determination was made that one agent acted in an unprofessional manner by yelling denigrating and offensive comments regarding a migrant's national origin and gender. This same agent acted in an unsafe manner by forcing his horse to narrowly maneuver around a small child on a slanted concrete ramp, which put the child's safety at risk. On multiple occasions, several mounted agents used force or the threat of force to drive migrants back into the Rio Grande River, despite the fact that the migrants were already within the United States. Despite the actions taken by certain agents during this incident, there was no evidence found that any migrant was ultimately forced to return to Mexico or denied entry into the United States.
Chris Magnus, the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, a news conference today. You can find the full news conference at our video library at cspan.org. World leaders reacting Friday with outrage, writes USA Today, to the assassination of Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe who was shot from behind in Nara in western Japan while campaigning for his political party. Abe, 67 years old, was Japan's longest-serving prime minister, holding that office from 2006 to 7 and 2012 to 20 before stepping down due to illness. He was known for seeking to establish Japan as a more internationally outward-looking country, including stepping away from its post-World War II pacifism. That's from USA Today. News of the assassination broke early Friday as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was meeting with his counterparts from Japan and South Korea on the sidelines of the G20 Foreign Ministers Summit in Indonesia.
I had the opportunity to share with Farmer Takahashi the very deep condolences of the United States on the passing on the assassination of the former Prime Minister Abe. This is shocking. It's profoundly disturbing in and of itself. It's also such a strong personal loss for so many people. For the United States, Prime Minister Abe was an extraordinary partner and someone who clearly was a great leader for Japan, for the Japanese people, but also so admired as a global leader, and one who really, during his time in office, brought the relationship between our countries, the United States and Japan, to new heights. A leader with great vision for what a free and open Indo-Pacific region could look like, and also an incredible ability to really work toward realizing that vision. I know he was doing remarkable work as well, even after being Prime Minister. We heard that from a number of leaders who were in the G20 with us just a short while ago. So I had the opportunity to share, as did my friend Park Jin, the Prime Minister, our deep sorrow at what's happened today. I have to just say finally that our thoughts are really with all of his family and his friends. We really deeply mourn a loss for his family, a loss for his friends, a loss for the people of Japan, a loss for the world.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Indonesia as he was meeting with representatives of Japan and South Korea, attending the foreign ministers' meeting of the G20, the world's wealthiest and most developed nations. This was on the sidelines as the news broke of the assassination of the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Back in the United States, President Joe Biden traveling to the CIA, marking the 75th anniversary of that agency. The anniversary actually comes up later this month, but spending a couple of minutes talking about the assassination.
Before I move to my specific remarks I want to talk about today, I'd like to say just a very few words about the horrific, shocking killing of my friend, Japanese Prime Minister Abe. I became acquainted with him when I was vice president. I hosted him. He hosted me in Japan. And I just stopped by the Japanese embassy to see the ambassador and sign the condolence book for the Japanese people. I knew him well. We worked together closely for years, and we spoke and consulted one another when I served as vice president. And he was deeply committed to strengthening the alliance and friendship between the United States and Japan and pursuing an open and free Indo-Pacific region. And service to his country and his people was in his bones. Even after he stepped down from public office, his focus on his health, he stayed engaged. He cared deeply, and I hold him in great respect. This attack has had a profound impact on the psyche of the Japanese people. This is a different culture they're not used to, as unfortunately we are. Here in the United States, we know how deep the wounds of gun violence go from communities that are affected. And this assassination is a tragedy that all the people of Japan are feeling. Today, I'm keeping his wife and family in my prayers, and the United States is standing in solidarity with our ally Japan, with confidence in the strength of Japan's democracy as they approach their elections on Sunday.
President Joe Biden at CIA headquarters. He was there to mark the 75th anniversary of the CIA, spending a couple of minutes talking about the death, the assassination by a lone gunman, apparently, of the former Japanese prime minister. Some reaction as well from former U.S. presidents. Donald Trump on his Truth social media platform saying this is really bad news for the world. He said, few people know what a great man and leader Shinzo Abe was, but history will teach them, and be kind. He was a unifier like no other, but above all, he was a man who loved and cherished his magnificent country, Japan. Shinzo Abe will be greatly missed. There will never be another like him. And former President Barack Obama writing, I am shocked and saddened by the assassination of my friend and longtime partner, Shinzo Abe, in Japan. Former Prime Minister Abe was devoted to both the country he served and the extraordinary alliance between the United States and Japan. Shinzo Abe visited the U.S. a number of times. In 2015, he gave a speech to a joint meeting of the U.S. Congress. Here's a minute of it as he highlighted the U.S.-Japanese alliance.
Our alliance has lasted more than a quarter of the entire history of the United States. It is an alliance that is sturdy, bound in trust and friendship, deep between us. No new concept should ever be necessary for the alliance that connects us, the biggest and the second biggest democratic powers in the free world, in working together. Always, it is an alliance that cherishes our shared values of the rule of law, respect for human rights, and freedom.
Shinzo Abe in 2015, when he was Japanese Prime Minister, he was shot and killed by an assassin today at age 67. That speech before the U.S. Congress from C-SPAN's video library. Back to the G20 summit in Indonesia. This from Associated Press. Deeply divided top diplomats from the world's richest and largest developing nations failed to find common ground Friday over Russia's war in Ukraine and how to deal with its global impacts, leaving prospects for future cooperation in the forum uncertain. Although they were present in the same room at the same time for the first time since the Ukraine war began, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov pointedly ignored each other. That from AP. U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, tweeting that Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, and I are returning from Ukraine more convinced than ever that the Ukrainians can defeat Russia's barbaric invasion if America provides the arms and aid it needs to win. Our message to the Ukrainian President Zelensky and all Ukrainians was, the U.S. has your back. That tweet from Senator Blumenthal. Senator Blumenthal also tweeting a video of himself and Senator Graham in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, holding framed copies of a bill that they're sponsoring to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. You're going to hear from Senator Graham first.
Authored by myself and Senator Blumenthal, designating Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. When we get back, we're going to try to get the Senate as a whole to pass the resolution, hopefully leading the way for the administration to label Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism in the category of Iran, Syria, and North Korea.
I think there's going to be strong bipartisan support. This picture ought to tell you something about America right now. There's bipartisan support to defeat Putin, to call him out as a pariah and a war criminal. And we're here to say to President Zelensky, we're behind you, and America will continue to be behind you.
We see Ukraine as the hope of democracy and Putin as a terrorist.
And Russia should be designated as a state sponsor of terrorism, just like Iran, North Korea, the other pariahs of the world.
Thank you.
That's Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Richard Blumenthal in Kyiv on Thursday. The Senate returns from its recess Monday, 3 p.m. Eastern. You can follow it live on C-SPAN 2 television and on our free C-SPAN Now mobile video app. House, by the way, also back from recess on Monday, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. That's live on C-SPAN television. One more note, next week as well is the next hearing of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. That's Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll have live coverage on the C-SPAN networks. And today, NBC News reports that former Trump White House counsel Pat Cipollone appeared before the House January 6th committee for an interview and has been willing to answer the panel's questions. A source said he's been a cooperative witness within the parameters of his desire to protect executive privilege for the office of General Counsel. Reports are that it is a transcribed interview behind closed doors, so no audio or video available. AP says the committee wanted to talk to him about his role in trying to prevent then-President Donald Trump from challenging the 2020 presidential election and joining the violent mob that laid siege to the Capitol. Cipollone had been a sought-after witness after bombshell testimony revealed his apparently desperate and last-ditch efforts to prevent Trump's actions. That from AP. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. For more of Washington's top stories sent to you every day, sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night and a good weekend.